Hi, I'm Sarah Baker of Featherweight Sarah LLC, and today I'm talking with Nebraska Quilt Company about the education and the experience that I have in teaching quilting, teaching Singer Featherweights, and working with Nebraska Quilt Company to help customers expand their horizon on quilting. Let's see. I've been sewing since I was a child. I would make Barbie clothes. And then when I was in high school, my mom taught me how to read a pattern and I made some of my own clothes. So that was exciting. And then as I got older, I started doing some cross stitch. And then when I was pregnant with my first son, I was going into Hancock Fabrics on like 84th and the interstate. And I would see this quilt hanging up and I counted how many squares were in the quilt and I bought fat quarters and I taught myself how to quilt. I was 25. So I've now, spoiler alert, been quilting half of my life. Quilting half of my life. It was before my first son was born and I made that for him. We didn't know the gender of the baby and the quilt that was hanging up had pink and blue and green and I went, this is perfect. And I did hand bind and I used polar fleece for the backing. So I didn't even do traditional quilting with a batting and a backing. I used a polar fleece and I just stitched in the ditch and I wrapped my binding around from the front to the back and my corners were not mitered. And my son has that quilt to this day. So it's pretty cool. The ladies in my family are somewhat crafty. My mom was a home ec major. So as I mentioned, she taught me how to read a clothes pattern. She was more into the tailoring and the seamstress side of it than the quilting. Her mother crocheted and crocheted and crocheted. So I had her to look after. And then my mom's older sister, my aunt on mom's side, she does quilting. So I've bounced ideas off her over the years, but it's been on my mom's side. Aunt on my dad's side does a lot of sewing work. So she was someone that was an inspiration as well. So a little bit on both sides of the family, I had some inspo from the ladies in my life. My husband and I actually were not living together when we got married. He was in Kansas City and I was here in Omaha. And my mother-in-law bought me a sewing machine. And that's when I started doing that quilting and thought I liked the quilt that was hanging in that Hancock Fabrics and I wanted to make that for my baby. So so mother-in-law helped me out with the machine and then mom, I knew how to operate things just from mom teaching me. So it went off from there. I mean, honestly, hundreds from baby size to king size. I would say I have made hundreds. I don't know if I could crack the 1,000 mark, but I know I have made hundreds. So 500, I'll say that. Well, that's the thing with quilters is we make one and we give it away to family and friends and then we still want to keep sewing because sewing makes us happy. So it actually makes me happy twice. It makes me happy to sew it and it makes me happy to give it away. I don't always know where that quilt might be going when I'm finished with it. And as a side note, I made a jelly roll rug, or not a jelly roll rug, I'm sorry, a jelly roll quilt. So it was a jelly roll race that I did as a class and I had that quilt and I just came across it when I was cleaning some things up earlier this spring. And there was a student at my school, I'm a teacher, and I looked at this quilt and I went, this quilt is supposed to go to her. And I just felt like my heart was just led that it was supposed to go to that young lady. So I went to my principal and I said, here's the deal. I have this quilt. I made it for a class a couple years ago and I just came across it and I really think it needs to go to this young lady. And she says, okay. She says, why don't you email the parents and just kind of lay it out and let them know what you're thinking and let's just make sure that we get some okay from parents. And if they say no, then they say no. And I said, I'm totally fine with that because giving a quilt to a 14-year-old student is kind of I don't know that's a really big deal, but I also didn't want to make it a big deal. So the last I emailed with parents and they were overwhelmed with joy that I wanted to do this for their daughter. And I gave it to her on the last day of school, and actually the day before. And she gave me a giant hug, and I got email from mom, from dad, from the daughter again. She wrote me a thank you card. And so sometimes when I make quilts, I don't know where they're going until my heart speaks to me later on, and then it tells me where it's supposed to go. I've self-diagnosed my with craft ADD. That's maybe ADHD. I often get bored, so I'll start another project, or I switch through projects. I also started knitting several years ago, so I'll knit for a while. I often watch movies or shows while I'm sewing. I do a lot of chain stitching or chain piecing, and I'm fairly quick with my sewing. So I often have a lot of projects going at the same time, and I can switch easily from one to the other if I'm getting bored. I also have something I call like palette cleansers. So I make little zipper pouches, or I'll make some kind of a little project in between just to keep my sewing mojo going. I'm not a fan of the cutting. I love the sewing. I love that 1/4 inch seam allowance. I love when I press the fabric and the points line up. It just makes my heart so happy. And then I really like binding. So that's kind of a 4-letter word with some people, but I love binding on the quilt. So those are two things. I love the piecing and I love the binding. It's saved me. It's saved my sanity. It's given me a creative outlet. It's given me something to focus on when maybe things in my life weren't going the way I wanted to. I could always come and do some kind of crafting or quilting. It's brought me together with friends, with colleagues, with meeting people, with networks of folks, and it has made a giant impact. As I mentioned before, I teach school, and now my school children know about quilting because Mrs. Baker makes tarps or something. In addition, I've had coworkers become interested in quilting from the things that I have in my classroom and from talking about it all the time. So it's made a great impact. My family is supportive. My sons and my husband are always asking me, "What are you working on, Mom? What are you working on, honey?" And they want to see my projects. So friendships, mental health, connections, networks, it's impacted, I would say, almost every part of my life. I am a full-time school teacher. I teach 7th grade language arts in a local middle school here in the Omaha metro area. And how do I balance? I now love to go to retreats. Well, I've always loved to go to retreats, but that's really been my outlet because oftentimes I come home from school and am exhausted because middle school kids ask me an average of 7,823 questions a day. But I love to retreat, and so I balance my full time with my sewing by retreating, by picking up projects on the weekend, and then I mentioned I knit, so the knitting becomes very meditative if I'm sitting down and sharing TV time with my husband or my kids, and so that's probably the best way I balance it. What do I want to do when I grow up? I would love for Featherweight Sarah LLC to be a business, and it just requires the time to do that and the dedication to do that. I'd like to have a greater social media presence and do videos and educate. I love to talk about quilting. I love to talk about vintage featherweight machines. Those things are my passion, really, and I feel that I have a lot to offer. And because I have an education background, that it's a really smooth transition for me to be able to do that. So I would love to grow my brand and grow my business. I have been teaching quilting classes over the last 5 years at Omaha area quilt stores. I've given lectures and done lecture shows on featherweight maintenance, and I've given maintenance classes both in my home and at area stores. I've also given quilt lectures, so I lecture to quilt guilds about featherweight machines. So I love to pick up any sort of quilting classes that I can and educate folks on all sorts of things quilting. I really have not made my own patterns. I'm really good at using other people's patterns. Um, it's maybe something I might look into, but I'm pretty linear and I like to take somebody else's patterns and showcase their things and show someone how to make their pattern because I'm good at following directions and I feel like I'm good at helping others see the directions maybe if they're confused. Let's see, my oldest project I have is when my second son was born, and it is a paper pieced project. So I have that one I'm working on. I've been working on making zipper pouches because I was gifted about 200 vintage zippers from a friend, and that's kind of that palette cleanser I mentioned. I have a quilt pattern called Iconic that I'm working on. I got a quilt kit from a store. I also am just finishing the Night Sky pattern by Jaybird Quilts, working with Nebraska Quilt Company to get that done. And I have a table runner to finish from the leftover blocks from that. I'll put me on the spot. What else? I know I have other ones and I've got kits and kits and kits galore. I really do my best to use what I have. And then I do my best to be frugal with what I do have. And I'm always doing something little with the leftover pieces. It's really hard for me to get rid of anything. So I, again, make the zipper pouches. I call it building real estate. So I sew the pieces together. I make pin cushions, pouches, all sorts of things. So the Night Sky pattern by Jaybird Quilts, Julie Herman of Jaybird Quilts, is a pattern that uses her sidekick ruler. And something about the patterns with Jaybird is that there are no Y seams, but there are stars in almost all of her patterns. So this Night Sky uses a parallelogram essentially, and then two opposite triangles on either side. And what you do with that is it then builds a triangle, and then you build three triangles. And then from those three triangles, you build half a block, and then the half blocks go together in an interesting layout. So instead of horizontally, they go vertically. And matching those points is perfect with the Jaybird sidekick ruler because the points match with her degrees that are on her rulers, and the points just come together perfectly. She also suggests that you open up the seams, and so I've been showing pictures and love to show how those seams open and how the pieces work together. So with Nebraska Quilt Company, I've used the Ruby Star fabric line Eye Candy and have worked with them and with the pattern to create this Night Sky. I think you should contact Nebraska Quilt Company. They have the best classes around, and they've got everything from beginners to intermediate to advanced. You can take bag classes, you can take stripology classes, you can take paper piece classes and long arm classes, and something that Nebraska Quilt Company has that other area companies don't show, or other quilt companies don't show, is t-shirt quilts. I get asked 100 times about t-shirt quilts, and Karen is one of the best instructors around to teach you how to make a t-shirt quilt. Oh, I don't know if there's a best thing about quilting. As I mentioned, the community and the friendships that I've made are just priceless. The heirloom quality things that you can make, the ownership that you have when you take a piece of fabric and you make it into something that is a work of art is really something that is an emotional journey. It's a well-being, mental health journey, and I just really enjoy the process from the beginning to the end. From touching and feeling the fabrics to cutting to sewing them together, and then working with friends in a network and a community to get that done from the beginning to the end. I really love kits. So when I go into a store, and Nebraska Quilt Company is great at this, I like to see a kit because sometimes it's easier for me to pick up a pattern that I like and the fabrics are already chosen for me. So in my kind of busy life, I really enjoy that. I also am inspired by the fabric. I'm drawn to bright, bold colors. So I really like turquoise or Tiffany blue. So I often am drawn to those colors, and I find a pattern that I like, and then I go and get to choose the fabrics for it. So I really enjoy that, and I think that's probably inspiration really comes a lot from the store or from the people around me. So my creative space is 2 full rooms at my house. As I've mentioned, my husband and my children are very supportive of me in my creative endeavor. They also get um, they get the lucky end of it where they get to have results of my quilts and other things that I make. So my creative space I have a featherweight table set up with a featherweight machine, and I have machines on the wall that give me inspiration. Um, I also have a table that is a bathroom vanity. So I've got cupboards and I can hide things in there. My cutting space is up on risers. It's a kitchen table that I have up on risers. So for my height, it's at the perfect height for me to cut. And I've got cutting tables, or I've got rotary cutters and mats on there, rotary mats with rotary cutters. Underneath the table, I have all sorts of hidden storage with shelves and wire bins, and then I have a cutout in the room here in my craft room where I've got wire shelves that hold all sorts of crafting goodies behind that. The other room when you come into my house is what I call the long arm room. So I do have a 10-foot table for a long arm, and I get to long arm in there. And I also have a vintage sewing machine of a Singer 66 model, and that's in a cabinet. And so when I have heavy duty things to do, leather or big bags, I'll go to that machine and I'll use that machine in there. And how much time do we have for my featherweight collection? I found a featherweight in 2016, and I have not stopped. I absolutely fell in love with these little machines, so much that I have a tattoo of a featherweight on my arm. And because when I met people, I would talk about these machines, I got called Featherweight Sarah, that girl with the featherweights. So that was the kind of the idea for my LLC, is Featherweight Sarah LLC. But my collection, I'm going to say 25 right now. And they are a variety of things from the earliest. I don't have a 1933 when the featherweights were started to be manufactured, but I have a 35, a 36. I have a variety of sort of each variation of the machine through the years. And then I have a white machine, I have a tan machine, I have a black side machine, and I also have a custom painted Tiffany blue machine. I have several centennial machines. I have my husband's birth year, because many people like to collect their birth year, but they didn't make them in my birth year. I do have my birthday machine. So my birthday is November 27th, and I have a machine that was manufactured on November 27th, 1934. So my birth year is not 1934, but it is my birthday machine. I'm really excited about my collection. I was lucky enough to have it on display at a museum in Missouri for over a year, and I was able to speak at a lecture hall down there about featherweights. And so I love the machines. I love to talk about them. I love the history. I love the maintenance of them, and it's something that's really exciting for me. So the start of my business, I have been a fan of Featherweight company that specializes in featherweights for many years. And I've taken classes with this company, and I decided that I wanted to teach maintenance classes, and I also wanted to do some quilt classes. I was out to dinner with some friends who's an entrepreneur, and I was telling him some of the ideas I had, and he said, you know, you should really do a DBA or an LLC just to cover yourself. And I've had a DBA in other states I've lived in for a variety of craft things I've done, and it just made sense at that time to form the LLC because I was looking forward to doing more classes, to teaching things, and it just seemed like a good idea to have that coverage just to be a limited liability company. The most rewarding ones with fabric. I most rewarding. I've tried my hand at a variety of quilting techniques, everything from paper piecing to stripology, using different rulers and different ways to build quilts, whether it's like the vertical or the horizontal or rag quilts or chenille quilts. I've tried all different kinds, and I think I like them all. I tend to do more traditional piecing than I do paper piecing, and I've never tried English paper piecing, but I think I just find the traditional quilting the most rewarding. I would say the very first quilt I made on my Featherweight, it's the Lori Holt Farm Girl Vintage quilt. And I spent several years making that one. I was at a retreat and with some friends, and I was using my modern machine that has a large hole for a needle in the needle plate. And I kept not breaking, I kept like sucking the piece of fabric to this quilt, to the little quilt block into that part. And I literally threw a quilting tantrum. I got up from my space at the retreat and I went outside. I was so frustrated. And that's actually when my aunt called me and said, hey, Sarah, we have a Featherweight for you, because I'd been looking for one. So I made that quilt on a Featherweight as soon as I contacted my aunt and I got a Featherweight. I started making those quilt blocks. And because the Singer Featherweight has a one hole for the needle, it does not have a hole to zigzag. It only does a straight and forward and backward stitch. I made the rest of those blocks on the Featherweight and it was smooth as silk. So that's probably the quilt that holds a lot of value to me because it was the first one I made with my Featherweight. So that's probably the one that sticks out to me the most. Sewing makes me happy twice. It makes me happy when I make it, and it makes me happy when I gift it to a recipient that appreciates it. So I've been really lucky to have that in my life, that I find a person and I gift them a quilt, and it's not for me to be happy but seeing them and seeing their reaction in something that I've put time into, I feel selfish. I told my husband I feel selfish about that. And he said, it's not selfish, it's selfless. But I guess thinking about somebody else and them knowing that I thought of them is really special. I try not to be the quilt police. People always, oh, the quilt police, the quilt police. But I think the thing that makes a good quilt is that it's given to a person or the person uses it. If somebody uses it, doesn't just stick it away in a closet because they don't want to mess it up. I mean, when I give away a quilt, I say, you need to use this, wash it, dry it. I'd love it if you didn't use it as a dog bed, but if that's what you want to do, that's what you get to do. So I think the best thing about a quilt is really when it gets used.